right. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to Artful Design Television, COVID-19 edition, online and still in quarantine somewhat. And the pandemic is still out there, so I hope everyone is staying safe. I'm your host, Go Wong, and with me, our co-host and our co-producer, Kung Woo Kim. And as always, you can find us at artful.design/TV. And for those of you joining us for the first time, we are a multi-format weekly series encompassing artful design, music, coding, critical making with the helpings of history and philosophy, and life check-ins. No experience needed, all are welcome. And this is an ongoing experiment. And the first order of business today is let's actually do a check-in to see how you are doing today, how you're feeling today. And given the theme of today's episode, which is all about game design, maybe I'll take this chance to ask you, what games are you playing, if any? And they can be digital games, video games, but they don't have to be. For those of you who have kids, what games are they playing? What games are you playing with them? And so feel free to type that into chat. And we're going to jump right in and start thinking about stuff. And of course, today's theme include games and gaming and game design, where Kung and I are going to do our darndest to try to unpack some of the ways that we might think about these things with all of your help. And to think about, I think this medium, games as a medium, and games is something that is culturally quite pervasive in many different forms. And this is kicking off a new ongoing thread regarding game design and Artful Design TV. And to this end, we actually have a new section on the website devoted to games at artful.design/TV/games, where you can find videos of playthrough videos and analysis, and a lot of the fun stuff is related to games, gaming, and game design. Some of the questions we're going to be asking today is, can games be more than entertainment? If so, in what ways? Games, toys, is there a difference? And if so, what's the difference? And this question, which is kind of I guess feels like an age-old question, even though video games have not been around all that long and digital games have not, but can they be art with a capital A? And also, do they need to be? And how do we think about, again, this, in a way, I suppose this is a question around kind of the cultural place and the cultural roles that digital games actually play. And to the extent we care about art, which, this being Artful Design TV, I assume we all, in our own way, do. I think it's a question worth asking. So we're going to start with then this question, what is our collective obsession with games, right? And specifically for something like video games and digital games, that the irony is that those of us who play games, that have people who tell us games are a waste of time, they will rot your brain. Hearing that ironically only makes you want to play games more. I guess that's just how human nature works. The World Health Organization actually a few years ago actually declared gaming addiction as a disease, something that certainly this is the darker side of gaming, that yes, it has been shown time and again that we have actually seen stories of direct harm that people have caused themselves in really playing games, to the point where sometimes, great physical harm, mental harm, and even death have occurred. At the same time, games is something that, digital games in particular, is something that has been growing steadily. This particular shape chart here, actually, if we're to take a closer look, is actually just the size of the digital game industry since 1971. A few years ago, games actually surpassed the size, in terms of the size of the industry, surpassed the movies. And in 2018, this is a $140 billion worldwide industry, and it's projected in about 2 years to surpass $200 billion worldwide. So this actually says that, yeah, there's an economic angle to this, it's also that something, for better or for worse, that people really want. And and it started with a number of things, including consoles. Actually, on YouTube, there are just a lot of wonderful content, if you can find them, that actually outline some of this history, but also look at, eh, weigh in on kind of this idea of games as cultural things. For example, this video from Triple Jump.
As the first generation wound down, console manufacturers began to realize they could, do something other than rename Pong. Not every experiment was successful, far from it in fact, but boy, was it nice to see some ambition for once. The APF Imagination Machine might have been a bit too ambitious, however. The console's main gimmick was that it came with a built-in APF basic compiler, essentially a way for consumers to write and execute their own programs, or to input code for programs others had written. However,
Right. So this video actually is a countdown of, or maybe a count up of all the video game consoles, um, from worst to best according to this particular content producer. And this is like entry 90. Like there have been actually way more than 90 consoles produced, like hundreds upon hundreds of video game consoles. And this is just the top 90. And this clearly has been something that, is kind of ingrained. So this might be a good point to ask, what are some of your favorite games, or even your favorite game? And with this, I'm also gonna ask Kungwu. So Kungwu, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing okay. And well, it turns out that you and I both play a lot of video games and have played video games for a long time. So tell us a little bit about your history of playing video games. Like, how long have you been playing?
Yeah, I think I played video games since like I was 7 years old when my dad bought me the Comboy console from Nintendo. And my brother and I played a lot of games together. And since then, I don't think I have a period of time that I like put games aside from
You
my
didn't play
life.
video games.
Yeah.
And in leading up to this episode of ours, I asked you to take a little personal inventory and
Uh-huh.
to just do a rough count of how many games you've played over the years. And
Yeah,
what was
so
that?
I listed them on like this Excel file, and I counted up to 134 that I played and finished. I thought that was a lot in the first glance, but that was only like 6 games per year. So I thought like I definitely played more than that.
Yeah, you're such a slacker.
Yeah, I'm such a
But
slacker.
at the same time, it seems like, I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, it's a heavy tail distribution where,
Hmm.
yeah, I've played, I don't know, maybe dozens, maybe over 100 games. I don't know, but there's like one or two or three that I've played a lot.
Yeah.
And the time I've devoted to those few games far outweigh probably the sum of the rest of the tail of all
Hmm.
the other games combined. Do you have such games for you?
Yeah, I think I I play a lot of role-playing games with like fictional and original narratives. Um, and just like how it's different from reading Lord of the Rings when you're in middle school than when you're like 29. Um, when I play them again, especially like the role-playing games, it kind of like comes to me in different perspectives, which is interesting.
That is interesting. And to give you a sense of actually of my of, I've tried to make also kind of a take stock also of my game playing days, as it were, and and for me, I remember seeing video game, not really even playing it. When I was 7, I stumbled into a video game arcade in Beijing. This is like 1984, and I was instantly captivated by the glowing pixels on the screen. I don't even remember what game it was. It might have been something like Joust or Pac-Man, and I was like, "Whoa!" And kind of like moths to a fluorescent light. I'm just like, "This is." I just can't take my eyes off of it. Um, for me, though, I've been really playing games since since this, the kind of the original Nintendo Entertainment System. I still remember the day that somehow I convinced my parents to get an NES system. And I think this was in 1987. We didn't have a lot of money. And so, like, for me, like, the two games I had for that were the games that came with the console, which was this combo cartridge of Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. And I played just the heck out of these games. And that was 1987. Uh, Games have changed a lot since then. This is Assassin's Creed Origins in 2017. Actually, we'll get to this. Is still in the future for us right now, but we'll get there. But back in the day, it was that, and I played games and studied games very 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 closely. And then the first time I saw Warcraft 2 was like another. It's like, whoa! It just, I don't know. I think I just saw this idea, thought the idea of having these little controllable characters on screen, just to be kind of adorable in a way, and to have them bend to my will was actually something that's felt very powerful in a playful sense. In college is when StarCraft came out, so my friends and I played a lot of that. And on this note, actually, for those of you that might not realize, StarCraft is one of the games that really kicked off kind of what we currently think of as the esports scene, or the cyber athletics, however you want to think about it. This raises another questions. Are games not really, are they art or not, but are they sports? So this is a kind of a video clip from a rather historical match in StarCraft between two players, Boxer and Yellow.
I definitely saw this on TV live.
No way. So I'm going to pause this real quick and to say, if you never play StarCraft, you might not know what's going on, but just listen to the crowd here, right? The crowd goes wild. Right. So wait, you actually saw this, like,
Yeah,
live.
I was in middle school. I think all young people in Korea tuned to this channel. There's a broadcasting channel that's dedicated to gameplay.
That's amazing. I mean, this is a historical footage, right? I mean, this was a incredibly inventive and unconventional strategy, and a kind of an all-in strategy. I think I remember this was in game 3 in a series in which Boxer, who was the one who was coming down the map, actually lost the first 2 games to Yellow. Mm-hmm. And in this one, he's kind of employed this super out of the box thinking and rushed with his workers in the famous SCV rush moment in history. And then for me, like, though, I didn't play a lot of StarCraft because I went to grad school. And it's probably good for me that I didn't play a lot of StarCraft because, I might have not graduated from grad school had I done so. But I didn't stop playing games. I was playing Halo. And really, this was the killer app for the original Xbox, right? And by the name, you can tell that this is a kind of a sci-fi first-person shooter game, and based on the setting that's kind of this ring world, not unlike Larry Niven's novel Ring World. I think it must have inspired this game. But then people have done more with this in the years since. Rather than just playing this, they've actually used this as kind of an engine to produce a kind of machinima.
Hey, yeah? You ever wonder why we're here? It's one of life's great mysteries, isn't it? Why are we here? I mean, are we the product of some cosmic coincidence, or is there really a God watching everything, with a plan for us and stuff? I don't know, man, but it keeps me up at night.
So this is all done in-game using the game engine, but of course voiced over to produce kind of these stories. And this is a series called Red versus Blue, done probably over 10 years ago.
What? I mean, why are we out here in this canyon?
stuff about God.
Nothing.
You want to talk about it?
No.
You sure?
Yeah.
Seriously, though, why are we out here? As far as I can tell, it's just a box canyon in the middle of nowhere. No way in or out.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason that we set up a red base here is because they have a blue base over there. And the only reason they have a blue base over there is because we have a red base here.
Yeah, that's because we're fighting each other.
No, but I mean, even if we were to pull out today and they were to come take our base, they would have two bases in the middle of a box canyon.
Right. So you can kind of see that this becomes kind of a, this is actually the very first episode of Red versus Blue where it gets kind of actually existential pretty quick. It's like, why are we here? What is our purpose here, right? And for me, then I started at Stanford, and this is in 2007, and kind of hilariously, I started playing StarCraft again, but also other games like Rock Band. Rebecca Febrink, who you might remember from our episode on AI 2 episodes ago. Actually, this was our Rock Band band, and we had our Rock Band avatars. You can see Rock Band Rebecca, Rock Band Guh, and we played Rock Band. And also, I went and designed toys and games of my own, I suppose, and that was, of course, as part of Smule and things like Ocarina, which actually brings up the question, right? I mean, is this, what is this? And by these 3 modes of Ocarina, actually wondering in what sense is Ocarina an instrument? Is it an instrument? Is it a toy? Is it a game? When is it which? And can it be like more than one at the same time, right? And so for me, actually, if you think about Ocarina, so in this case, you could say that, yeah, it's like a toy because it's kind of, it's playful and it's almost like a joke that you blow into your phone to make music, and it's disarming and it has no real, there's nothing productive you necessarily would do with this. So that is like a toy. I suppose one could say it's like an instrument in the sense that it's something you can learn to get better at. The sound is generated on board, and the interactions you make with the ocarina is something that you can learn to kind of make it your own. And so there's a craft involved with actually playing ocarina. In that sense, it is like an instrument. And in this video we just saw is that this is the game mode in ocarina, and that there is a clearer purpose in the sense that these circles down the middle of the screen is telling you perhaps like how to play the next note, but how you express that note is up to you. So in a sense, this is a game like kind of like, it's a form of Ocarina Hero, so to speak, in the vein of Guitar Hero and Rock Band, with the difference being the sound is actually generated entirely on board here, which means that nothing's pre-recorded, and you get to make each rendition of anything you play something that you can get better at, and something stylistically and expressively your own. So in that sense, for me, I do think about, at least in the realm of musical games, ocarina is something that could embody aspects of a toy, an instrument, as well as a game, and therein lies, for me, kind of a critical distinction between those. Other games include Magic Piano. That was the old office at Smule. And the wonderful people there. So in this case, it is a timing game, and you have these notes that fall down. Now the pitch is actually baked into each of these dots, so you don't have to worry about those. What you do have to worry about is the timing. So again, nothing's pre-recorded, it's all generated in real time, which means you can express at least the timing of each playthrough in a way that works for you. And also,
Suyashi asks if the sound generator was written Chuck.
So in Ocarina, the sound generator is in Chuck. in Magic Piano, we're using a piano sound font. So in this case, I think there are aspects of it that are in Chuck, but the main piano sound in Magic Piano is actually, for the piano, for us is the easiest way to actually get something that's a convincing sounding piano. For Rock Arena, we really needed the sound to be something that's continuous, malleable, and hopefully expressive by some measure. And so, yeah, good question. Other questions, actually, feel free to yell them out. And then StarCraft 2 came out. It's 2010, Wings of Liberty. In 2013, this is actually, remember that video of kind of StarCraft match? Well, that just keeps getting bigger. And this was the Global StarCraft League's final in Seoul in June 2013. I happened to be there that year because NIME conference, the New Interface for Musical Expression conference, was happening in Seoul at the same time. So, in fact, Spencer Salazar, Mark Sakura, and I actually submitted a poster actually on sonifying StarCraft to make music. And we were only moderately successful at best, but it was an opportunity to kind of think about games as like another dimension of games to make a kind of music for us, but also we got to go see the finals, in which we saw Silky reverse sweep innovation and one of the biggest comebacks in GLSL history. I'm still playing games, playing Assassin's Creed of late, and also the Discovery Tour by Assassin's Creed Ancient Egypt, which there's no assassinations. You're here to kind of take in this reconstruction of this ancient world and to learn about parts of it. So this is all to say games have come a long way, I think, right? And in fact, we find ourselves in perhaps in a kind of golden age, if you will, of indie games. Games that actually are motivated perhaps by this sheer desire to make a game, because from the love of games, from the love of playing games, and the love of creating games for someone else. Hence kind of this indie game design. And there's been a lot of interesting games that have actually come out, not only just that are fun and unique, but they themselves kind of interrogate what games actually could be and kind of the cultural place that they could have and the cultural role that they could play. So how do we think about all this, right? What are some of the tools we might bring to bear in thinking about games and game design and gaming and kind of the culture that plays games? In this case, specifically, we're talking about digital games. Let's start with this concept of play. Readers of Artful Design might remember chapter 6, which is actually all about game design, in which a distinction between work and play is actually articulated, where work, by contrast to play, is something that's performed for a future benefit, done for an external purpose, an exterior at that for the sake of which work is deliberate and is often governed by rigid rules and conditions. Work. By contrast, play is done for the present, is done primarily for its own sake, is spontaneous, is often improvised, leaving room for open expression. And as Schiller once wrote, we are never so authentically ourselves as when we are at play. And play, therefore, then is what we do when we're free. Play is also what we do to be free, right? And that's kind of this underlying play notion that we could choose to use as a lens to see game design. And also this question, why do we play games? And therefore, why should we design games to play? To paraphrase Kaiwa in his 1961 book, Man, Play, and Games, play is free and voluntary, occurs in a separate space, play is uncertain, the results unforeseen, and the results are unproductive because nothing is created, though we at Artful Design might dispute that depending on now the type of play that we could design for. Play is governed by rules or design constraints and make-believe. It includes a special awareness that is isolated and protected from the rest of life, right? And play then is kind of this separate space. that we set aside for its own sake. And play, in a way, is fundamentally experiential. It's about actually experiencing it for ourselves, which, of course, makes no sense if we're to say, well, yeah, I like to play, but I don't have time for that. Maybe someone else can just play in my place. It doesn't work like that, right? Play is something you got to do. And in artful design, the idea of design could be seen as constraints, which is really kind of a policy between a user and an underlying technology in order to get a set of affordances. And you interact with the thing that's designed. That's the interaction, but it leaves you with something. That's the aesthetics. That's the left side, for example. Now, the right side is kind of this MDA model that's been used in game design and in analyzing games in the game design and media studies community. And that MDA stands for mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics. In a way, it maps quite naturally to this constraints interaction aesthetics, and that mechanics are the game mechanics, so the rules. The dynamics is actually the moment-to-moment gameplay, the experience, as well as the system that supports all of this gameplay. The aesthetics then is what the game leaves you with. And for example, the MDA model lists actually 8 different kinds of aesthetics of games. They include sensation, games as sense pleasure, discovery, games as uncharted territory, narrative, games as drama, fellowship, social framework, fantasy, games as make-believe, expression as self-discovery, challenge, games as obstacle, submission, games as pastime. And in artful design, I actually added a 9th aesthetic. It's games as reflection. It at least leaves room for this possibility that we could make games that seek to understand something about us and through our experience of actually playing the game. And just to put 2 more concepts out there, and these are kind of our tools we're going to continue to use in the unpacking of games. One is this dichotomy of types of play that Kaiwa actually puts forth. One is ludus. It denotes structured play by rules and competitive strive towards goals. For example, if you think about chess or the game of Go, it's very much ludus, in the sense that there are rigid rules and there's competitive strife. Like there potentially is going to be someone that wins the game. By contrast, Paideia is describing a more free-form, expressive, improvisational recombination of behaviors and meanings. And if you think about Lego, without just kind of a box of Legos, you can build whatever you want. Minecraft could be like a Lego, but in a digital form, or Play-Doh, which you can shape with your hands into whatever. That's more of the second form of play. And in a way, this is also could be thought of roughly as a distinction between what we think of as games and what we might also think of as toys. So with this kind of brings us back to this kind of this debate, and I don't necessarily mean for us to resuscitate this rather kind of old and possibly exhausting debate that has happened. But in the context of game design, it is worthwhile to look at this as another way to think for ourselves, again, the cultural role of video games and digital games. Now, for example, like, they're actually on various sides of this debate, and there are a lot of arguments thrown out, and also a lot of the arguments are just not very good, but they're commonly used. We're not going to go over all of them. We might look at some of them. One of the complaints around games as being capable of being art is kind of this idea that, well, games are motivated often by something other than like play. It's actually a form of commerce. For example, this is probably the worst title for a video game I can think of, this is actually the full formal title of the game. It's Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. Wow, when I see this, I'm like, yeah, this is not something that makes me immediately think whoever made this is trying to go for art. What this clearly is a movie tie-in that is a game that's just trying to capitalize off of, kind of a movie that's currently or recently in theaters. and it's actually made by one of a developer I like, Ubisoft, who actually makes Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour and other games that I enjoy. But at the same time, there's the other sides of people who believe that, well, games, maybe some games aren't art, but some games maybe can be art. And some arguments that are often employed are, well, art is able to do this, and here's a game that kind of induces the same result. Therefore, the game must be art. And of course, that by itself is not really an argument that holds water, but it's interesting to think about. For example, this game, this art made me feel something, and this game made me feel something. Is the game art? So these are actually really good questions, not in of themselves, but I think they raise kind of larger questions as to what constitute art. And also, by the way, as I mentioned, we might be in the middle of an indie golden age of game design, right? The aforementioned Stardew Valley, which you're actually just you're here to take over kind of this ranch. And in this game, you're not here to like slay monsters, but if you want, you can like make it into a vineyard. You become like just grow things, but it's in this retro gaming aesthetic. This came out just a few years ago, but it's kind of in the 20 years ago 2D world that's in. There's Undertale, which is often, it's a favorite game, also a retro game in the sense it's built recently, but it's like a RPG with a really interesting, kind of a system of, you might call it a morality system, if you will, where your actions have interesting consequences. And they then are reflected back into the gameplay. And certainly a lot of games have done this to varying degrees of success. There is this game. By the way, this is, I guess you can count this as the service part of today's episode, that these are games that you might go and check out for yourselves because they're really interesting. They challenge the notion of what games can be. And this is Return of the Obra Dinn. This release was just last year, but look at the visual of this game. Right? This is a 1-bit dithered graphics aesthetic, right? It's just 1 bit. It's either black or white, and gray is really done to this kind of dithering, and to actually to convey different shades of the color. But this is kind of a mystery game, if you call it that. There's Kentucky Route Zero. There's this War of Mine. And these are all made by small studios or sometimes even individuals. Stardew Valley was, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that was like one person, right?
Yeah, one person working on it for 4 years, 10 hours every single day, 365 days.
Kind of projects of labors of love, if you will, right? And there's Cuphead, there's Ori and the Blind Forest. I don't want to say anything about any of these things, any of these Kungwu. Like, what is Cuphead, for example?
So Cuphead is like 1970s cartoon type of aesthetics game. And it looks kind of cute, but its difficulty is, I heard it's insanely hard. So it's like like those Rayman / Mega Man kind of game. But it's designed to really give the players challenge.
Right. This is kind of looks like a cartoon, but it's kind of like Dark Souls and just the brutality of the difficulty. And it's done by design, right? And then there are things like like kids. And by the way, there's a playthrough of this on the gaming section of Artful Design TV. And like, what is this game? What in the holy hell is happening? This is from the recording of the playthrough. Whoops. Here we go. Why do we all just push all these kids into a black hole? Here we're all falling. I mean, I can slow them down, but I can't keep them from falling. Oh my goodness. Oh no. Right. So that's Kids. What is that game about? I mean, that game is meant to be finished in 30 minutes or so. And I still can't say what the game is about, but actually it does make give my mind somewhere to go. Right? Is this a game? Is it an allegory for our education system? Is this, are these us? And what does the black hole represent? So in a way, this question actually, I mean, this game poses a lot of questions that it does not proceed to answer clearly whatsoever. But I think the questions are there.
What?
And then there's Disco Elysium, which is a really interesting kind of a murder mystery detective game in which you are kind of this, you actually have, it's entirely dialogue driven, right? And it's all about choices. And in a way, you have dialogues with everything, including your own psyche. It's a super simmering cerebral game. And you are this detective who is somewhere between, like, apparently a really brilliant detective to someone who is just a total mess. And you wake up basically with a huge hangover, unable to remember who you are and what you're doing here. So, this is another kind of example of an indie game. And by the way, you can find a lot of these again on the section in the website. So, a bit more about the history of the debate, right? I mean, some inflection points, or at least points of interest along here, might be when the film critic Roger Ebert in 2006 kind of offhandedly kind of stoked the hornet's nest that is the internet when he said, video games cannot be art. And this really set off a huge like tsunami of people weighing in on this, to the point where actually, unfortunately, a lot of that were kind of vitriolic and really mean-spirited personal attacks against Ebert himself. And Ebert's argument was that for him, it seems like storytelling is at the center of art, whatever form that art could take. And the interactivity and kind of this non-curated nature of games, Ebert argues, is something that takes away from this kind of storytelling. And in a way, for him, like, he just doesn't believe games could act. He didn't believe that games could really be art in that same realm. But the internet was also quick to point out that Ebert didn't play a lot of games. In fact, didn't seem very interested in playing games. So there's just this tug of war back and forth where Ebert later doubled down on this, like, no, games can never be art, which only made and people kind of brought in examples, and this is where the two sides of the debate really began to intensify. And but this is, this, I think, in a way could be seen, regardless of ways of thinking about, are video games art, are they not? We could actually see this urgency in this debate itself as a form of, I think, our societies trying to, again, like, culturally legitimize digital games. And in the sense that we seem to do this thing a lot in our lives. So what is this meaning in human life? And so wherever you come out with this, I guess, in this question, I think one thing seems certain is that we want to know. We want to know the role of these games, even if we do not play games ourselves. There are much of the planet, they do play games. So what does that mean, and how do we design games in a way that accords with who we are and who we want to be? And I think that's actually, for me, this question of, why design games artfully? I don't know if you have anything to add to that part.
Yeah, I do agree with Jack in the comments that there are interactive installations in museums. And I saw a piece where the users actually put stickers on, like, the artist's piece, and that's part of the art. So I think the definition of art isn't always, like, so clear, that it's hard to put our needle on something to define this kind of gray area to be inclusive to art or not. But yeah, I mean, Roger Ebert has a very good point, which I think was beneficial towards the game designing community with this heated debate. Um, but I I I still think that games can be art. Um, but I do agree with Ebert that I think he said he hasn't seen a masterpiece compared to that of great works of fine art, music, literature, film, or poetry in terms of gaming. I agree that I can't really think of one that's really comparable, um, but games are still in its infancy stage, and it will take times for significant works to sort of germinate in the society.
I mean, that's a great point in that I think can video games be art is a critically incomplete question. It's actually woefully incomplete in that there are actually at least two terms in there that are just like not is ill defined in just by the word themselves, like art, to the point you point out, and also like video games, right? It's not one thing. It's all these different forms that could take, as actually we've seen so far. But it's interesting. So I think I'm kind of, I personally, I'm curious as to where you all come out on this, and what are the ways you have of thinking, not so much around this, like, I don't know, think it's a binary question. It's like, is video game art? I think that's kind of, again, it's incomplete. But how do you think about this cultural role of video games, and also the cultural potential of video games, right? And to this point is where I think I find myself, like you, like in a way, like I want Ebert to be wrong. I really want him to, and I love Ebert as one of probably my favorite film critic of all time. And you know, sadly he passed away, I think about 7 years ago, and I was very saddened that by that, and for his sake, and also for the sake of just the understanding he brought to us about how we could see movies and how through movies we could see ourselves, right? This, in a way, but I wanted him to be so wrong on this. But at the same time, I also struggle to find single examples where it has this that reaches this higher echelon. But maybe it doesn't mean it's not there. And if we're actually further unpack kind of what Ebert may have been talking about, it actually may have been something like actually what we started talking about last week with Jack Atherton. So Jack kind of talked about where he got this concept of folk design, and it was from Rich Gould's Plenitude, in which he outlined, you know, thinking about art is potentially like there's fine art, there's pop art, there's folk art, and the fine art perhaps is more close to this idea of what Ebert might have been thinking about. Some might call it the sublime art, though for me, I feel like the sublime certainly could reside, or it could be induced by any art, including folk art, including pop art. But that's just me. But if we're to look at kind of the sublime, actually, often you see this this painting. Actually, that's A Wonder Above the Sea of Fog, 1818. And when I ask, you know, what is the sublime? And by the way, this is Assassin's Creed. This is me playing Assassin's Creed. I couldn't resist taking this photo in the game, perhaps because it was just something that reminded me of that. But this idea of the sublime, at least in this case, right, is often thought of as this consequence of experience, something you've experienced, and from that experience, you really have this sense of awe, and sometimes paired with a sense of terror. In this case, this might be an example of experiencing the natural sublime, of looking at just the immensity of nature, and that is both awesome and terrifying, right? And if you think about the sublime in this sense, it's actually not something that moves you, that like makes you suddenly, like, I don't know, want to cry or jump for joy. It's actually more contemplative, and it's actually even disinterested. And this would be a notion that we can trace back to the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who talked about this notion of aesthetic disinterest. And what that means is that Well, it's actually the exact opposite of passion. Passion, if you think about it, is a word that actually shares the opening with another word, passive. And there's a connection there in that passion is in a sense passive. It may seem like that seems like a weird pairing, but if you think about it, passion is not something you control. Either if you don't feel passion, you can't just feel passion on a dime. And when you feel passion, you can't turn it off on a dime. You are subject to it, right? So the aesthetic disinterest is actually says there's no passion necessarily here. It's you're free to contemplate the thing for its own merit. And as you stand in front of, I don't know, say the Grand Canyon, and you begin contemplating, as well as experiencing just the immensity, something about your sense and your actually meets your cognition. You're like, dang, this thing is immense. But then you keep going, and in this rational kind of induction, right? You're like, wow, the Grand Canyon is so huge, but it is like rather tiny compared to, I don't know, the continent we might be standing on. The continent is just a small part of the planet Earth. The planet Earth is just a tiny, tiny speck in the solar system. We're like 8 or 9 light minutes away from the sun, with just mostly an expanse of space in between. The solar system is just this insignificant piece in this arm of our galaxy, one of hundreds of billions of galaxies, and are there things beyond galaxies in that sense? So from this induction of, I would say, the Grand Canyon to you, you've kind of inductively, your mind goes far out, and in there lies this truth you realize. And the truth is could be something as simple as just your infinitesimal place in things. At the same time, it's kind of uplifting that, well, infinitesimal actually means non-zero. So yet we exist. Anyway, this is all rather philosophical, but it's something that I think all of us have experienced. You know, there's a natural sublime, there's the moral sublime. When you realize the action and the choices of another person, in that action you find some justice and beauty and truth in what they do. Well, that you might call that what you're feeling to be something of sublimity. And by the way, I'm talking about the sublime a lot because this is also in the title of the book, Artful Design: Technology in Search of the Sublime. And for me, I think the sublime is something that is very akin to the way that I think Ebert is thinking about it. So in that, I think, as much as I continue to wish Ebert to be wrong in his offhand and rather dismissive position that video games can never be art, I kind of see where it's coming from at the same time, right? And I'll leave us with one more thought before we kind of look at some more examples and open up for discussion, is this idea of imperfect art versus perfect art. I don't know where this comes from. I heard this once and it made a lot of sense, and it's a lens I've used, but I cannot find the source. And if you know the source, please let me know. But this is something that you know, something that I've heard is that imperfect art is that which moves you. Whereas perfect art, whatever perfect means, I guess it means it's something that makes you still. And that therein lies this difference. And therein lies the difference between passion and disinterest. And in a way, I think Ebert, again, is looking at this idea of, can video games produce this kind of reflective stillness in us, and to use this artifact as a that kind of clarity to see ourselves. So certainly, like if we look at things like kind of AAA titles, we kind of see a couple of different trends going. One of they're just getting really beautiful. In some of these games, these are the AAA titles, which means these are done by huge studios with a huge following, and these are often cited as like really, you know, entertaining games. This is Uncharted 4.
I call myself a backseat gamer because I prefer letting my boyfriend do the driving while I yell directions at him. Go that way.
I'm trying.
So this is a really popular channel called Girlfriend Review, and in which the reviewer, she's actually acknowledging that she likes to be a backseat gamer, which I actually have to say I do too. I love being a backseat gamer. Games have gotten really complicated, and it feels like a lot of work to play. Sometimes I just want someone else to do the work. And in fact, Uncharted 4, I experienced this entirely as a backseat gamer when my friend Robbie played this, and I was visiting him in Oregon. I was just sitting on his couch, just actually doing the same things, like try that, do that, do that. Oh my God, that was a lot of work. I'm so glad you're playing it. But let me go on with this, like just the beginning of this review.
Oh, did I lose?
I practically had it. You can give it another shot.
The downside is that the stories I want to experience often get interrupted by resource management, sullied with diuretic combat systems,
Your gun is no match for my bicycle.
or totally abandoned for side quests.
Here, your frying pan.
When developers strive for maximum gamification, it can keep gamers more engaged, but every time they pause to fondle their balls inside a menu screen, I'm like,
Oh man, it's tired in here.
However, when developers strive for maximum storytelling, it keeps even non-gamers engaged.
Oh, better than nothing.
Which is why the first time I walked in on my boyfriend playing a Naughty Dog title, it looked like this.
Everyone I have cared for has either died or left me.
You have no idea what loss is.
I'm sorry about your daughter, Joel, but I have lost people too. Everyone except for you.
You're right. You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad.
And with Uncharted 4, Naughty Dog has elevated cinematic game design to a lofty new peak that I declare the pinnacle of backseat gaming. Allow me to explain. Uncharted 4 feels like watching a really fun movie.
Okay, so Uncharted 4, right? I mean, this is about as AAA as they come, and here I think we must introduce kind of this concept, which if you're in the game design community, you've heard this a lot, right? And for those who have not heard it, ludonarrative dissonance. What is this? Well, actually, we talked about both pieces. We talked about ludus earlier, which is this idea of a rule-based play. That we can just take to mean gameplay in this case. Narrative is the storytelling. And the dissonance says that, well, there's something at odds between the gameplay and the story it's trying really hard to tell. And in a way, this has been a really interesting lens. I think for me, and I've been talking to Kungwoo, I believe it's also been interesting for him, as a lens to kind of look at kind of this idea of games and their and really kind of their capacity to induce the sublime, perhaps. So what's the ludonarrative dissonance in something like Uncharted 4? Well, you play Nate, right? You are this kind of fun-loving Indiana Jones type of like really capable, kind of snarky, irreverent, but ultimately good-hearted explorer, here to find hidden treasure. And of course, they're bad guys. Now, the dissonance comes in that in order to really play the game, and that's the kind of the way the game is played, you could choose to like kill hundreds and hundreds of people in the game, making you really just a homicidal, like mass murderer. In fact, the ludonarrative dissonance has become such a buzzword that I believe in Uncharted 4, there's even an achievement that Naughty Dog, the game developer, put in called ludonarrative dissonance, which is an achievement you get after you kill 1,000 enemies. And if you think about it, that seems really dissonant, right? I mean, if you had to dispatch a few like people that are trying to kill you on your way to survive, and you know, kind of like in Indiana Jones movies, you might be like, okay, I can see that, and I can even see myself like vying for my own survival in that case, and maybe others might behave differently. I don't know, but like killing 1,000 people, that just doesn't seem realistic. And so the story actually, in a way of what it's trying to project and the characterization of the people in there is somewhat, one could argue, at odds with the very gameplay. But the gameplay had to be this way because it's also catering to an audience that expects a kind of an action game, right? So therein lies kind of this ludonarrative dissonance, which also actually exists in games like BioShock. And I played all three BioShocks, from BioShock 1, BioShock 2, in this kind of like Art Deco underwater city, to BioShock Infinite, which takes place in this gorgeous city in the cloud called Columbia, which is this kind of darkly disturbing alternate version of America set in the 1920s. And here you can see Ben Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson as kind of these idols of the city. But this has been kind of like, co-opted into a society that you find that is, well, certainly no less racist than the one we currently live in. But it's one that tries to grapple with some of these social issues. It grapples with this story where you're here to retrieve Elizabeth, this girl, to wipe away some debt you had, and you had to fight through a lot of people. And the dissonance, again, not only comes from like killing just like waves and waves of people on your way to unfold the story. I would say it's just the gameplay. Is that it alternates between here's the story and here's the game. Here's the story, here's the game, to the point where I think one is left wondering, which one is in service of what, and perhaps more to the point, which one is grafted onto which. Is this a great story grafted onto this first-person shooter game, or is this a first-person shooter game grafted onto a great story? But either way, it seems somehow lacking, at least to me, right? In the sense that I think about life, it's like, life isn't grafting. Life just is. So in this case, as much as I enjoyed playing these games, I cannot help but see this disconnect. So in a way, this all comes down to this idea of purpose, I suppose, and kind of what you design and what you're supposed to do in the game, and what the player thinks they're supposed to do in the game. And I think it's actually the sense of purpose that I think gets at this idea of what games can do. So, by the way, time check, we're hitting up on 2:00, just for those of you that have something at 2. But we're going to go on for just a little longer, but also love to hear your thoughts and to please continue to put those into chat. In playing this kind of an indie game called Firewatch, right? You play this character who actually just experienced a really kind of a difficult relationship disintegration, where your partner actually she's moved to a different continent because of a mental illness that she's suffering. She's moved to be with her family in a different continent. You don't know what to do with your life. So you move away from the city and become kind of this lonely fire ranger. And live this life of solitude, in which for the first part of the game, you basically just walk around the land. You talk and read. Your only companion, this person you talk to, is Delilah. She's the fire ranger like 50 miles away in the next mountaintop or something. And you go around and you do stuff to go retrieve supplies, do all these menial tasks. But the real beauty of this first part of the game is, one, just walking through this environment, while in these conversations with Delilah, it's making you think about this character's relationship. And in that, it was actually making me think about my own relationships with people, friends, past relationships, and thinking about, what does that all mean? But then the game kind of changed at some point. There was like, oh my God, I discovered a dead body in a cave. Is there a government conspiracy? And suddenly I found myself no longer walking, but running to actually fulfill what I thought was now the purpose of the game. Whereas before, the purpose was unclear. And so in a way, almost on a dime, the game's purpose actually changed for me. And in a way, I have to say, like, for the first part of the game, I was like, dang, you know what? This is so reflective, and it's so peaceful, so calm, and so thoughtful. Ebert was so wrong. Here's an example of a game that is sublime. But then when the dead body came in, all this mystery came in, I stopped running. I was like, damn it, Ebert was so right. And so, I don't know. These are just some of my thoughts on this. And there are a lot of other examples we can go to. And I refer you to examples, things like Save the Date. I'm not going to go into this for the interest of time. But this is a retro game that it's kind of a multiple choice game, but then it breaks the fourth wall. It ends up questioning the very nature of video games and this idea of video game designers needing to cede control and agency to the players. And what does that mean from a storytelling angle? So in a way, I don't know, if there's one game that I feel like, at least for me, is the closest to being sublime, it might be this game, in terms of that the gameplay and the narrative is one and the same, right? And if I were to kind of, let's jump forward here, we might even call this a kind of ludonarrative resonance, right? In that the gameplay and the narrative actually, they work, they reinforce one another. In musical terms, this would be a kind of a ludonarrative consonance, in that they are one and the same. So with this, I think Kangwoo, one last example is something I want to show. Something we want to talk about is this.
Oh yeah.
So tell us about what we're looking at here.
Okay. So this is the game I play the most. It's called Final Fantasy XIV. It's an MMORPG, which stands for Massively Multiplayer Online Game. And we do this like normal raiding, which is like having 8 people come up with a strategy to overcome this challenge of an enemy. And I play this with my gaming friends. But in this game, there is also this called a performance mode. Where you can play these kinds of instruments. There's quite a few. And you can make sounds with your keyboards or mouse.
That is the lowest trumpet
Yep.
I've ever heard.
So, computer music designer in me wanted to exploit the heck out of this this mode. So, gaming friends and I gathered up sort of the music we wanted to perform together. So if you go around the maps in the region of the MMORPGs, you can hear background music. So I arranged all the background music that they wanted to perform through MuseScore. These were almost all done by my own ear, so it was quite a lot of work. Then we rehearsed.
So each of these are different, is a character, like a human player.
So there are a total of 8 human beings in this virtual characters.
And you've kind of made an arrangement with a part
Yep.
for each of them to play.
Yep.
Whoops. Here,
But the synchronization part was incredibly difficult. So we actually had a software that, you know, types the keyboards for you based on the MIDI notes. So we prepared 11 music in total, and we marketed through Reddit. And a lot of players came, players that we don't even know. These characters in the audience are all like different players of the game, and it's showing like a third of the people.
I think you said there are other people who are actually outside.
Yeah, who couldn't come in
because
to
of the server load.
Because, yeah, we didn't expect this much of people to come.
I like how they not only came, but they all came and then sat down.
Yeah.
Like they could just be standing there, but no, they were like, seems like a really orderly audience.
It's a very good community. Then the performance, happened, and we even dress rehearsed like this walking and bowing. This is me as a conductor. So we performed from slow music to fast music. And me as a conductor was controlling their audio synchronization in real time on the fly while they were performing because of network jitters, just making the instruments kind of off by 50 milliseconds to even like 500 milliseconds. So I had to listen to each of the instrument parts and sync it on the fly. And we had to move outside because there were people who couldn't come into the house because of the server capacity.
You did like an encore outside.
Yeah. And they're all sitting down in front. It's just really cool. I think about 200 people came and about 200 people watched it through stream. And yeah.
I'll just say people in this game seem to know really how to celebrate kind of the after party here.
They were all going crazy.
So tell me, Kangwoo, how did it feel? And also for this is your kind of gaming group, right?
Yeah. So these are people who I game with almost every day. And what moved me was that the performers, my gaming friends, some of them have never even performed once musically, although it was virtual. And they really were immersed in their characters. So while we were waiting in the backstage, they were incredibly nervous and tense. And I was like calming them down. It's a virtual performance. It's okay if you mess up. um, but they were really feeling like they were performing. And after the performance, some of them even told me that it was a dream come true for them because one of their bucket lists was to perform musically. And though it was virtual, I think it was a really like visceral experience for them. It's really, really worth my time to
that was a
arrange all
lot of
these.
work.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a network computer music system that you kind of cobbled together there, in addition to arranging the music and really organizing, and then the real-time actual conducting, which meant you had to be listening in and then adjusting the latencies between the different players. This is interesting. In a way, like this is there's so many things we could talk about, but it seems like the one that you touch on there was this idea that this is a visceral experience, and that it seems like the players, it seems like they embodied the character. This is a character that they've been playing this game for
yeah,
dozens, maybe hundreds
time.
of hours, and they've kind of not only grown attached to the game, they clearly still like it, but they've embodied something about the characters in there, right?
Right.
And so, in a way, walking on stage as a virtual avatar, I suppose would be it would be visceral. It would be experiential, because that, for all intents and purposes, is you.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And this is something that the game design, the game didn't exactly was designed for.
Yeah.
But you all kind of cobbled it together given what was available. So, there's so much more we could talk about, but maybe we're gonna stop talking for a bit here, and to really take stock of kind of this wonderful, I think, conversation has been happening in chat. I have not been keeping track of it, but I just saw there's been a lot of chat, and to kind of see what you all think. What are some other thoughts, and how do we think about gaming, game design, and any questions or any thoughts when we want to foreground. Yeah, here's someone that says backseat gaming must be one of the proponents of competitive esports. Considering that is how many of the traditional sports became the form of entertainment they are today, esports being an Olympic sport might be an occurrence in the near future. Yeah, that's really interesting to think about. And in fact, backseat gaming is something I found I really like. In fact, it's not just me or the person who made that video. If you think about it, like, this could be a big reason why something like Twitch TV exists. In that, if you were to tell like someone 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 30 years from now, we're going to be spending our time watching other people play video games on our computer, and we might even pay them to do that. That would have been probably seemed like the craziest idea ever. Like, what? But we found that, yeah, we kind of like doing this. And part of that is, I don't know if it's this vicarious playing of games, and also for me, it's like more relaxing if I didn't actually have to worry about the game, especially if the game had like a really strong mission or a quest component to it. I kind of want to just hang out and you know, and just be. So kind of being in like in a place when watching other people play video games and also chatting is like a community. And yeah, let me see if there's other thoughts here. Quite a few. It's cool to see games repurposed for other things. Animal Crossing weddings, indeed. And there's, I mean, it's, I mean, we didn't have time to talk about this, but for example, like Discovery Tour, right? This is a video that you can find on. There's a series of videos actually on Artful Design TV Games, where it's basically like, it's Assassin's Creed but without the assassinations, and it's just this beautiful reimagining of the ancient world. But then it has all these like mini tours you can learn about. And here's a Great Pyramid of Khufu.
Precisely oriented north-south to the 4 cardinal points of a compass, the length of each side of the Great Pyramid at its base was 230 meters, and its original height was 147 meters. The pyramid is a mere 0.05% error away from being a perfect square.
For example, that was like stop 6 of 15 on this particular mini tour, and there are like 50 mini tours that tells you about really the kind of the city planning, the urban planning, the history, the politics, the way of life
in order to achieve the shape of a true pyramid,
for example, right? But you can kind of relive this as well as the kind of, just to see kind of different places. This is Alexandria, at least reimagined by the makers of Assassin's Creed. Here's the ancient lighthouse, one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, which of course, hasn't been there for a long time now. This is me on top of the, taking a photo on top of the lighthouse and looking down at Pharos and Alexandria. This is me going sailing. And so in a way for me, like, it's not the open exploration. It's not even the immersion. It's the place of reflection that really is this unexpected repurposing for me, and especially from something that is so strongly purposed to something that is like goodly but weakly purposed. And it gives me, and again, the weakly purposeness of it gives me, I think, this, I don't know, this interest, but also this aesthetic disinterest to go and see things. And so I become this tourist in a very good way, right? Can the art aspect of game design be associated with or not how the end product is artistically rather than the way in which it was implemented, coded, storyboard, etc.? Like imagine a very high quality game being released in final package. If only megabits of size, the amount of creativity and innovation thinking required to code this thing must be also a work of art. It depends again on what you mean by art, right? I mean, there's certainly a lot of like just craft that goes into video games. That is unquestionable. Like it doesn't matter if it's AAA games, indie games, the amount of just craft and not just technical knowledge and implementation, but just, everything from storyboarding to game design, character design, model design, world building, and game mechanic design, and all the different pieces that you got to really put into any kind of, digital game is something that, I think people really have to learn to do and get better at, right? From Kathleen, I'm trying to make sense of this, so just opening up for more discussion. I find similarities in the concepts of ludonarrative dissonance and the unreliable narrator. So I wanted to figure out what differences there may be. One comparison is, I think, of unreliable narrators in literature and movies as the character or narrator speaking to us. But I can't think of an example where the designer, author, filmmaker gets to switch up the medium in the same way a game designer can create dissonance in design. That's a great question. It was welcome thoughts. What do you think, Kangwoo? Unreliable narrator versus ludonarrative dissonance. How do we think about it?
I feel like unreliable narrator is more intended by the designer, while ludonarrative dissonance probably wasn't intended.
Yeah, I think that again, I would I would say this exact same thing. It's like
Mm-hmm.
if you were reading a book, watching a movie, and somewhere halfway through, maybe by the end of the story, you realize the narrator, the first person narrative, which who you kind of by default trust in like a novel, if it's in first person, you kind of trust that they're kind of, you kind of get this inner access to what, you know, to what is perceived as true by them. And to for that to be betrayed is actually used as a device to actually for you to reconsider the story. Whereas in games, ludonarrative dissonance seems to be someone has an artistic vision for a really cool story to tell through a game. And then there's the marketing department and the people whose job it is, who, while they might also want to make a really fun and well, they might actually want to make art. It's their job to also be like, this thing's got to sell, it's got to speak to our core audience and to our core base. And so this is what the game has to be. These are the check boxes I think it needs to check. And so you get this mushing of these two imperatives. And I think that's what actually creates, at least in many of the cases that we've been talking about, this ludonarrative dissonance. So in a way, it's haphazard. It is not designed. In fact, I would say both camps that creates the dissonance in the one that I've described would probably wish there to be no dissonance. Whereas the unreliable narrator is like, sometimes that makes the story, right? We can think about movies that we love precisely because the narrator was unreliable. I don't want to name any because I think I would give them away, but you can all think of movies or stories in which then employs an unreliable narrator. So indeed, ludonarrative dissonance is not really an intentional decision, and it could be interesting if someone intentionally actually designed a game, intentionally designing a ludonarrative dissonance into it.
That's interesting.
Right? Because then it would actually remove, at some higher level, the ludonarrative dissonance. Many games like Save the Date actually acknowledges the potential for ludonarrative dissonance. So in a way, they've already are halfway there. But typically when we talk about ludonarrative dissonance, it's really like not intentional. It's just it's a feature that's really not intended, and it's really more of a bug. So let's see. I think with that, please feel free to write any other thoughts in chat. We like to continue this conversation, both in future episodes as we come back. There's so many more things we can talk about as far as games, gaming, and game design. Right. First of all, there are musical games, which we only briefly talked about in the design of these games. We can talk about kind of more about the game industry and the culture of gaming. And there's a lot of really interesting and a lot of troubling things about kind of the way that gaming culture has been, but also some ways in which it's evolving and some ways in which we would hope it evolve, but we will see. So there are a lot of other topics. If you're interested, please leave us feedback. In Artful Design, artful.design/TV at the bottom, there's tell us what you think, and feel free to give us suggestions on future episodes related to games or to anything else related to Artful Design TV. With this, Kangwoo, anything else to say?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I do think that gaming medium is truly unique in that the level of interactivity, and it allows kind of this deep visceral identification with the player character. I think it's the only medium that allows you to personify your experience with the character you're playing in the narrative. And I read this from a Guardian article that a novel can let you into a character's triumph in the battle, but only a game can make you feel proud of your victory. And I think games are such a good medium to achieve this kind of experience, personified experience.
Well said. And all right, Kangwoo. Well, this is what we have for today, and we have a lot more actually. But I want to thank everyone for joining us today in Artful Design TV, and hope this has been an interesting discussion. And and maybe let us know what games you're playing. Email us, leave us comments. And with this, we'd like to wish you safety, health, and artfulness and playfulness. Signing off. We'll see you next time.